In this section, we're going to understand domain names, website names, and URLs. Take a URL like www.newyorktimes.com. This is a URL that stands for a Uniform Resource Locator. A URL consists of a bunch of different parts. So let's parse this URL and make sure we understand every one of those parts. What you see on screen right now is the website name. The website name includes the www. The remaining bits, the newyorktimes.com, constitute the domain name. The domain name needs to be unique for every website, and that's why there are all of these stories about famous companies having squatters who have previously occupied their domain names. The suffix of this domain name is .com. .com indicates that this is a commercial domain. There are also a bunch of other suffixes for domains: .edu, .gov, .org. These are commonly used other extensions. In addition, there are country-specific domains such as .co, .jp, .in, or .uk. Let's return to the www for a second. www stands for the World Wide Web. This refers to a specific server inside the domain. That domain could have a bunch of other servers such as blogs.newyorktimes.com. That's another server or another location inside the same domain. Once again, www, as it's commonly abbreviated to, stands for the World Wide Web. So let's understand how one would go about hosting a domain name or creating a website. First, you would buy the domain name. Next, you would find a hosting company which would actually hold the files that represent the website. That company may be the same company that sold you the domain. For instance, we bought our domain from godaddy.com. The hosting company will set up a root folder. In other words, they will assign space for you on that particular machine or on that set of machines. They will create a directory structure which you will mimic in your website. Then you can simply copy over all of your files as is, and provided they refer to each other using only relative paths, your code, your HTML plus CSS plus JavaScript, will work right out of the box when it's copied onto the hosting company's machines. Let's take the example of this URL from the New York Times. It's obviously a long and complicated URL. It's the absolute path to an article on the Grammys in the New York Times. Now, let's concentrate on the last bit of the URL. This represents a location. It's a folder from the root where the HTML file for this article resides. In other words, on the web server for the New York Times, they have a folder called 2016. Inside that, they have a subfolder called 02. Inside that, yet another subfolder representing 16. And within that, subsequent subfolders for the arts and music sections. This is how complicated websites like the New York Times manage their content. They create a complicated set of directories for every day of the year. Let's return to the HTTP. In a URL like http www.newyorktimes.com, the HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. This is a protocol or a mechanism for information interchange. This is used to transfer information across the web. The server and the client talk to each other using this protocol. There's one more additional bit. When you type in this URL, the server will add a slash to the end of the URL. This gives it a directory. It will then search in that directory for a default file. Default files are called index.html or default.html, and web servers know that anytime someone points to this directory, by default, they wish to see the index.html or default.html files. Now that we understand web URLs a little bit better, let's return to the A tag. We had encountered this once before. At that point, we had only used it to refer to relative URLs. But the A tag can also be used with absolute URLs as well. In other words, you can just as easily specify an absolute URL in the href attribute, which we had previously discussed. And here on screen are two absolute URLs. You can see that both of these are New York Times URLs. In other words, they belong to the New York Times website. And in both of these cases, the URL ends without specifying a specific file. So when this URL is specified, the web server is going to serve up a default HTML page from that directory. Take the example of the second URL. Implicitly, a / will be added, creating a directory name called Room for Debate, and the default HTML file, which would be called either index.html or default.html inside that folder, would then be returned to the client. Now that we know that the A tag, the AHTML tag, accepts both relative and absolute URLs, which should we use? Well, the answer is it depends. Use relative URLs when you are referring to pages within your own site. This will give you the flexibility to change your domain name, and this will work seamlessly when you copy your web files from your local test environment to the production web server. On the other hand, use absolute URLs to link to sites other than your own. Remember that you will never be able to access them in relative form, because for one, they wouldn't be hosted on the same machine as your website, and for another, it would be a security violation even if they were for you to try and access them. This is also an excellent place for us to talk about the title attribute. The title attribute is another attribute that can be added to any HTML element. What this will do is specify a snippet of text which can show up when someone hovers over the element. As a tooltip, you should try and specify descriptive values for the title attribute whenever you can. This will ensure that folks who hover over a particular part of your web page or who are using specific screen readers will get this additional information. There's yet another bit of interesting functionality in the A tag. What if you wanted to link to a specific portion of a page? Is this even possible? The answer is yes. You need to specify an ID attribute. You can specify an ID attribute to any element on a page. Once you do so, you can link to that specific node or HTML element on the page with an A tag. Let's make this a little more explicit using an example. Let's say we have a list. We've already come across the UL element standing for an unordered list. Here we have two list elements, one each for Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. We now go ahead and add an ID attribute to each of these LI HTML elements. The ID simply specifies the first name of the candidate. Now, because we have specified an ID attribute, we can link to this specific part of this web page from anywhere else in any other HTML. Specifically, this means that when someone clicks on that link, the page will scroll down and bring this particular element into focus. Let's now make clear exactly how we would link to a portion of a page. You can see on screen now, we do so using the hash Donald. In other words, we have pointed to the specific ID on a specific page by adding the ID name with a hash onto the end of the URL. And again, doing so would take us to the specific list item for that candidate when we click on this link. Again, the browser would scroll to that list element if it was not on screen. And that's how we were able to link to a specific portion of a web page. Let's keep going. There's one last bit of functionality that the A tag offers us that we should be aware of. Say we want to open a link in a different window or a different tab. This is pretty common because when we click on a link, we might not want the new page to be loaded in the page we were currently reading. Opening a window in a new link or a new tab is very easy using the element A. You simply tack on yet another attribute, and this is the target attribute where we specify target is equal to _blank. Any URL which is specified this way using the target is equal to _blank will cause the browser to open the destination in a new window when the URL is clicked. As an aside, the user may have on a certain browser setting saying that the new window should be treated as a new tab. That's not a problem. That will simply cause such a URL to be opened in a new tab of an existing browser. The A HTML element is widely used, and it's important that we remember the 3 additional features that we discussed in this example. The first was the fact that it accepts both absolute and relative URLs. The second was that it's possible to link to a specific portion of a web page provided that specific portion has an ID attribute. And last, that it's possible to open a URL in a new window or a new tab by specifying the target is equal to _blank attribute.